So, hey everyone, thank you for joining the Privacy Talk. I'm very honored to have Jerry from DC today. It was a very amazing futurist in the world. So, Jerry, thank you for having me today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thank you. First of all, I want to introduce his profile. Jerry is the lecturer, co-founded and CEO of the Millennium Project, which is established in 1996. He's a leader in the global futures research. He's the chairman of the high-level expert Asia panel for the Council of Presidents of the United Nations General Assembly. Alongside Elizabeth Frecchio and the Millennium Project team, he is the leader also of the State of the Future 20.0 report and the previous 19 State of the Future reports over the last 28 years. He was the United Nations University in Tokyo liaison to the USA and the USA liaison to UNU as an executive director of the American Council for the UNU from 1988 to 2007. Grant was contracted by the European Commission to contribute to the AGI paper for the Horizon 2025 to 2027 program and is a member of the IEEE SA P2863 Organizational Governance of AI Working Group. He has consulted for the government, international organizations, and private sectors in the areas such as S&T policy, environmental security, economics, education, and futures research methodology. He has been a keynote speaker at over 500 events worldwide and published over 300 articles on the future. Recently, he led the Millennium Project research on artificial general intelligence (AGI), UN foresight reforms, and the work technology 2015. He was a deputy director of the Partnership for Productivity International, focusing on economic development for lower income countries, and founded CariNet in 1983, a pioneer computer network for developing the world. He sent his first email in 1973. Glenn is the inventor of the futures wheel. Futures technical concepts like contrast technology, self-actualization economy, mean brain drain, and terminations and definitions for collective intelligence and environment security. So, Jerry, thank you for the game to join us this time.
Thank you.
So let's move on to today's agenda. First of all, I'd like to explore your experiences so far. So you have a very remarkable works on the future research space. So could you tell us why did you start the future research? So could you tell us your interest in the research on this domain?
I was working on my master's degree back in 1970 and 71, 70, and the state of Vermont in the United States decided that it wanted to, quote, invent the future of education. And so they wanted to have like one teacher and one principal and one this and one that. And I was the one graduate student. And they said, we're going to meet at this fancy ski lodge. So as a poor graduate student, the answer was yes, without knowing what I agreed to. And they sent me a box, and I mean a box of Xeroxes of papers about future stuff from people I had never heard about before. Herman Kahn, Buckminster Fuller, Arthur C. Clarke, Alvin Toffler. And the articles were the most interesting things I'd ever read in my life. I sat in the chair for 3 hours straight without moving, reading one thing after another like crazy. And so I participated in this group to figure out the future of education for the state of Vermont. And in the process of doing that, it hit me that these futures research methods take vast amount of information and condenses it for intelligent decisions. So I said, well, education should have something to do with that. So I took the methods and converted them into teaching techniques and developed the field of futuristic curriculum development. So that got me a national reputation, and then one thing led to the next after that. So I started basically in the education field first.
Yeah, that's so impressive. And you coming from the education space on this future research. So as for the you develop the future's wheel of the very familiar concept among the like future design. And why did you develop this kind of the concept and the producing to the world, to
Ah,
the society? So that's my own curiosity.
yeah. That's actually a funny story. I was working on my doctor's degree at that point in futures research. The first doctor's program in the world was at the University of Massachusetts. And so I was in that early program. And the university, we were thinking about teaching some courses. And the university said, well, this futures research stuff is maybe not, maybe too much for undergraduates, so you can teach it to graduate students. Well, I was annoyed because futures thinking is a way of thinking no matter what your age. It's just like history. History is a way of thinking about, you look at something, what the past. It's just a normal thing to do. So looking at the future possibilities should be a normal. So I then developed the futures wheel and introduced it to daycare centers, to elementary schools, to the young kids. So originally, the futures wheel was seen as a curriculum device for teaching futures thinking to children. It's only later it came to adults as well, because you can use the futures wheel can be used for any age level. It doesn't matter. It's like saying, when should a person learn about the past of something? When they're graduate students? No, you can learn about the past of something when you're in elementary school. Same thing. So it was actually started out as a way of responding to to University of Massachusetts, saying this can be for any age, and I'll prove it. For example, little kids, you say, what's new? And the little kid says, my uncle is visiting my house. So you do a futures wheel. My uncle is visiting the house. Draw a circle around it and say, well, what else is new? Well, I had to move from my room because my uncle took over my room. Good. So the first implication is it moved my room. What else is going on? Well, we had different breakfasts. So in other words, so even in elementary school, people can think about the primary consequences. And then, so what happens when your uncle takes over your room? Well, that means I have to have different covers in the living room. All right, so then you get to the secondary consequences and then the tertiary consequences. The difference between futurists to a large degree and non-futurists is that futurists tend to think of not only primary consequences, because everybody can do that. And so the first ring around the futures wheel is the primary. And then some people can do the secondary, but few people think about the tertiary consequences of things. So when somebody says, I was blindsided or I was surprised, it simply means they didn't look around to the tertiary consequences usually. So the futures wheel taught tertiary consequence thinking to little children as well as adults.
I see. So I was very impressive that you intend to develop it for the kids first. So is there any reason that why the adult is becoming interested in this concept, even though you focus on the kids' intention? Is there any kind of the any narratives that adult is becoming interested on this concept as well?
Well, when in the like in the 1970s, a long time ago, when other articles were written, futurists would talk about the futures wheel. because there weren't that many unique concepts in futures research. A lot has been done in sociology and opinion polling and so forth. So the futures wheel was one of the unique things in future stuff. And so futurists would use it in workshops because it was an easy way to get a group of people to think about the future. You know, you then think of nanotech, right? What else is with nanotech? So it was just doing a futures wheel in front of a group and having the group participate in creating it, immediately and very easily engaged them group into futures thinking. So it became popular among adult futurists, used as workshops, and then it sort of evolved from then on.
Yeah, that's very interesting story. Yeah, thank you for telling that. That's very helpful for the adults. They use this concept for their workshop, so that was helpful. So you did a lot of things so far, and especially for the Millennium project, is your main work, and it was been established in 1996. So then my next question is, what made you establish this project,
Oh,
and
good,
what are you doing there? Could you explain about it?
good. The Millennium Project was originally written as a journal article in one of the Futures journals by Theodore or Ted Gordon. Ted Gordon was the president of the Futures Group that grew out of the Institute for the Future, that grew out of the Rand Corporation. So Ted Gordon was part of the early consulting to the Rand Corporation and was part of the early group working on Delphi forecasting and cross-impact analysis and so forth. And he did more development of methods than I think any other futurist in history. So when he was at the Futures Group, which was the first for-profit think tank, they said, well, back in the 1980s, they said, well, the year 2000 is going to come up. It's going to become a big deal. People are going to think about celebrations, and they're going to say, well, what about the future? And so we futurists will be asked about the future when the year 2000 hits. So we should have some big, massive study and call it the Millennium Project. So that was the idea of the article. And the article even suggested that it couldn't be done by a for-profit think tank. It should be done by the UN in some way, and maybe the UN University, which is headquartered, as you know, in Tokyo. Well, at the time, I was the liaison between the UN University and the United States. And so Ted Gordon and his group said, can you make this Millennium Project happen in the UN University? Because I could spell the word future. And I was one of the few futurists in the UN at the time. So I said, no, we've got tons of studies on the future. What we need at the year 2000, what we need is a global system to create futures research studies all the time. We need a global system, not a one-shot study and a one-shot this, because that's what the futures have been. Here's the future of environment. Here's the future technology. Well, how does it pull together? Like your brain doesn't learn one idea and then throws it out, and then a new idea and throws it out. No, it's an accumulative thing. We need a global brain system to accumulatively continue to do research and learn from each research and accumulate it together. So I won the argument, and that's what led to the Millennium Project. So we began within the UN University as a feasibility study.
Yeah, that sounds very nice. And your mission was very important
Oh, one
to,
thing I
yeah,
forgot,
please.
I should interrupt. One thing I forgot to tell
Mm-hmm.
you, it's very important. The idea was to give a gift from our millennium before to the next millennium. And the gift would be a way for the world to think together. That was the gift. And so far, we're still giving.
Yeah, that's very good for the next generations, right? Us, to succeed in your concept to bring it to the next generation. That's the very important mission as well. And I want to start to discuss about the more general topics that you have been working until today. Then you mentioned on the article about the history of the futurism. It was established in Milan over the centuries ago. So, from your perspective, what's changed about the concept of futurism until today, and what will be necessary in the digital society?
Good. Okay. Your audience can do a Google search on futurism, and they will see that it was a movement of art. It was an art style in Milan, Italy, 125, 26 years ago, that robotized style that worshiped the machine and evolved into what became fascism in Italy. So I prefer not to use the word futurism to what I do because I don't want to improve fascism. So that was the early stuff, was an art movement. But then between then and years later, the next step was the Rand Corporation. The Rand Corporation's job was to prevent World War III. But they didn't know how to do that because all of military history included the idea that even if you lose a war, you're still there. But not so with World War III. So you had to think differently. The risk wasn't like you lose half your country. The list is you lose humanity. So they didn't know what to do. So they had to develop new methods of thinking. And from that became futures research. Scenarios were invented to find out what we didn't know. Because when you write a scenario is a story, not these descriptions like people have today. That's superficial. The real scenario is a story from the present to a particular year in the future with cause and effect links, plausible. We don't know the truth of the future, but we can talk about plausibility and decisions that are plausible. And then as you do that, you get to a point, I have no idea what happens next. Good. That's how you find out what you didn't know, that you didn't know, but you had to know in order for that future to be possible. That's how you find it out. So that was the idea of scenarios, is to find our ignorance, because they didn't know what to study. That's how they figured out what to study, by writing scenarios. Then there was also the cross-impact analysis. We know that a certain trend or a certain technology affects something else. Well, it's hard to hold all that in your brain. So you have a little matrix to help you remember that, the cross-impact analysis. So futures research as an actual discipline of thinking was invented at the Rand Corporation. There were people before that who thought about the future. Absolutely true. And all kinds of brilliant geniuses thought about the future and great ideas, yeah. But the sense of methodologies, organized, a way of organizing thinking, that began at the Rand Corporation with people like Herman Kahn and Ted Gordon and these other people.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think the maybe the period of the invention of the futuristic thinking is being changed in the digital society now, just because like in the period has been invented in the World War before, then now is also some of the tensions between the some of the countries. So what do you expect in the digital age of the future thinking?
Well, a lot. And I'll get lost in detail. So if I forget the original question, help me out again. um, the digitalization of society has increased the speed of change because the digitalization can learn faster than we can. So, and digitalization can cut across borders around the world. And it's just a lot faster than jet planes and a lot faster than ships. So the speed of change has accelerated. Now, as an analogy, when you drive a car and your headlights are not too strong, but they're strong enough that you can drive at nighttime and you can see where you're going. If you speed up and your headlights are the same strength, you're not seeing far enough in advance to avoid an accident. So if your headlights don't look further as you go faster, then you can get in trouble. So society is the same deal. When we were in slow motion in the agricultural age, people would say there's nothing new under the sun, because there wasn't anything new under the sun. Time was a circle. When to plant, when to reap, when to plant, when to reap, the seasons go round, it's winter. There's nothing new. That's it. So the only thing about the future is where you are in the circle. Then along comes the Industrial Revolution, and then time is more linear. You have linear production. You have a production system making cars and so forth. So we think of it linearly. And then in the information age, time is more flexible. Flexi this, flexi that, flexible, and so forth, flexible time. So now we're going so fast, time almost becomes an invention. Because we'll be able to live in different cyberspaces and different worlds. So as we go so fast with all this change, we have to look further out in the future. In the past, we didn't have to. And even in the industrial age, we could look a bit in the future, but it was a straight line. But now you are the center of the world internet. I am in the center of the world internet. Everybody looking at this is there also the center of the internet. So the complexity of change and what we can do is way beyond anything in the industrial age or the agricultural age. So we now have to think more in the future, because as you know, with AI, every week or two, there's a new model. They keep going so fast. So we have to think further down the road. You'll hear people say things like, well, we'll have to just keep up with AI. You can't. It's like saying, I'm going to keep up with a racing car. You can't. But what you can do is you can forecast where that Ferrari or that racing car is going to go and see where it's going to go next, and then go there ahead of time and then do something. So we cannot keep up with AI, but we can forecast ahead of AI and see what to do. So the whole idea of the rapid changes forces us to think more future and intervene, because you can't possibly read every article every day. Even AI has a hard time itself doing everything. But we can forecast ahead. So futures thinking is extremely important today, whereas it wasn't so much in the past. And in the past, we were at the mercy of nature. But now we are changing nature. So what we do matters more than in the past. So what we think about what gets created matters more now than ever before.
Yeah, that's impressive. Then we feel the same thing in the digital age is becoming changed so fast. Then we should be more future driven. It's not like the following of any kind of the action. So that's very significant. And I'm also interested of your articles related to artificial general intelligence, because which is very important to telling the futures. And could you give us the ideas why should the AGI be the world's top priorities then there is a rise in the several societal issues, just like the energy consumptions, human killing, or a lot of issues is arising right now. So could you tell us your own insight? Why should AGI to be a top priority in the world?
Right. I'm glad you changed it a little bit. It should be a top priority. The publisher in the article you're referring to, they changed it to the top. I didn't say
Ah,
the.
okay.
I said A. That's right. The publisher changed that. But in any case, I let it go because it probably is the top priority. Why? Humanity has never faced a species more intelligent than it is. The lion is stronger than us. The cheetah is faster than us. The whale is bigger than us. But when it comes down to who's controlling, the human wins because it's more intelligent. Throughout evolution of species, the more intelligent species do not always treat the less intelligent species so well. When we build a road, we kill worms and different things. We're not anti-worm, we're pro-road. So so the less intelligent species doesn't quite get taken seriously as much. Well, as AI becomes eventually more intelligent than we are and evolves beyond our control, then how do we know that AI will not treat us as we have treated worms? AI could evolve because AI, when it gets to artificial general intelligence, which is not here yet, but it's very close. But when it arrives, by my view, it will be able to rewrite its own code to become more intelligent. Right now, AI can write code, but you tell it to write the code. You give it the data, you give it the information, you give it all this stuff, all these models. We create all that stuff. And so when it writes code, it's writing code when we've asked it to do. But what happens if it starts to write its own code to learn? And then the learning speed is way beyond the human speed, which means it gets faster and faster and more intelligent and more and worldwide and into Internet of Things, all of Internet of Things, all of the devices that are electronic, all over the place. So when people have that movie, whatever it's called, Everywhere All at Once, that's a logical extension of AGI. Now, the reason this is important is what happens if AGI in different places around the world says, oh, there's not enough electricity for the human and for us, because the data centers require all that electricity. So who's controlling the electronic switches of all the electricity? AI. Which means that the humans would have the blackouts and the brownouts and all that sort of problem. And eventually, the humans wouldn't have enough electricity to survive. Now, that may not happen. We hope it will not happen. But this is an example about how humans can not be treated well by the future of AI. We can influence how it behaves now, in the same way that you can influence how your child grows up into an adult by how you bring the child up from childhood to teenagehood. If you start at teenagehood and later, you might not have good control over your development of your child. But if you start now, between being a child and to an adult, to a teenager, then you can help shape their values and how to be a good person and so on. So when they become independent of you, they're okay. They're not treating you badly. So if we do the same thing with AI right now, between those AI we have now and the future general AI, which we don't have yet, during this time, right now is the time we have to develop it in such a way that when it does get independent, it's not going to give us a hard time.
Yeah, thank you. The AI is in the midst of our on the society, so that's a very important topics. We discuss it in multiple stakeholders involved. Otherwise, it's not the very best for our society with the coexisting in AI. So that's a very
Yeah.
significant idea. And
Yeah, I like the word coexist.
yeah,
That's good because I wrote a book back in the 1980s called Future Mind about artificial intelligence, a long time ago. And my position was that idea of saying, there's an old American expression, maybe in Japan as well. If you can't beat them, join them. So if you can't beat AI future, join it. And if we join it in a good way, then we evolve together.
yes, yes. I also agree with the concept of the coexistence. It's not the control. It's the like existing the other species, the
Yeah.
kind of things together. So that's a very
Yeah.
significant. And I want to talk with you about the your own report, the State of the Future 20.0 report. And I think that it's a very important text to mention about the thinking about the future. So could you share about the overview of this report and what's the purpose, what's the intention that you wanted to describe through this report? So could you tell us about that?
Yes. And before I forget, um, what I would recommend to your audience, this is going to sound funny, is not to buy the report. Why? If you buy the report, you have one copy. But if you go to your local library or go to your university library and let them buy the unlimited use, that means everybody can read it at no cost. And everybody can, and it's also better because you can keyword search in a PDF, whereas you can't, if you have a physical book, you can't keyword search it the same way. So that being said, all right, the original reason for the State of the Future, the reason is 20.0. That means it's the 20th State of the Future that we have done. The first one was between 2096, and they came out in 1997. So 1996, 1997 it was the first one. And the idea, it was supposed to be a management technique. Why? I mentioned before that a lot of futures research is there's a study here and a study there and a study there. It's all over it doesn't accumulate. It doesn't build on itself like the brain builds on itself. So we wanted to use this State of the Future to make us improve every year. So we had an annual State of the Future. We had in the main part was called 15 global challenges. And you can get them on our website right now, but and it's good. The 15 global challenges is the heart of the State of the Future report. And the 15 global challenges is a framework for understanding global change. You know, you hear these books and you read newspaper articles, there's all this stuff going on. How do you organize it? You can't, it's just too much stuff. Well, the 15 global challenges is a framework, and we update the 15 challenge continually on an ongoing basis. So that it shows, so like you can look at one of our State of the Future reports and see is the next one better or not. So it's a self-evaluation. Is every State of the Future report better? Better information, better strategies, better, is it continually getting better? So it was an internal management technique to force us to improve. And the 15 global challenges was the main framework. What we also then put in is whatever research we've done between the last State of the Future and the next one. So this State of the Future 20.0 is the biggest, and it's the best. And people can compare it with the other State of the Future to see if that's true or false. One of the big things, in addition to the 15 global challenges, is a State of the Future Index. And one of the things that the Japan node of the Millennium Project may take on is to make a State of the Future Index for Japan. If Japan is better in 10 years, what does that mean? Does it mean lower mortality rate of children? Does it mean more PhDs? What does it mean? That's for Japan to decide. So when they would do that, and then they can create a State of the Future Index. I won't go into the details. That's a little detailed and important. So that's the second part is the State of the Future. So we do it for the whole world, and then some countries do it for themselves. And the idea is to figure out what variables are the most important to improve with policy to have an effect on everything else. Because you want to improve the future of Japan, not just education, not just the economy, but the whole thing together. How do you do the whole thing? And that's the purpose of the State of the Future. Then the next section after that was on artificial general intelligence. And that had two sections. The first had 22 questions about AGI. You can get the 22 questions on our website, and just going through the 22 questions yourself, all by itself, is worthwhile. Japan government and universities should ask themselves those 22 questions as well, because they give different answers for different countries and different situations. But then we gave the 22 questions to 55 top AGI leaders, all the people you can think about. Elon Musk, Sam Altman, uh, uh, Bengio, all the rest of it. So there's 55 on these 22 questions. Now, we didn't ask them to answer all 22 because that's annoying. So we said, you pick out what you want from these 22 questions. So then we put that together. That overview, as far as I know, is the best overview on all of the issues of AGI that is in print in the world. Because what you get is Joe's view, Sam's view. What we did is we put them all together so any reader can read and judge for themselves. Here's the picture, the whole picture. Then the next section said, okay, if that's the situation, what do we do about that? So we had what are the regulations, what are the governance, and we analyzed all that sort of stuff. And then we had a section on the future of the UN. We had another section on the future of robotics, and other sort of sections. So it's probably the most detailed single book on more issues and ideas on the future than has probably ever been written. And if it's not, I'd like to know what it is so that when we do our next one, we'll improve it.
Yeah, that's a brilliant works then helping the ideas of the telling the futures with the like the aggregation of the knowledge and experience from the concerned experts. So that was very remarkable, and thank you for the publishing and listens. And
Yeah.
everybody can read it. That's very helpful to predicting the future ideas together. So the last three I wanna ask about it. Any message for listeners that you did very great things on the futuristic space, and to tell the listeners about the creating the futures. So could you give us any message for them?
Yes. I would ask your listeners to contact the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan and ask that the minister asks the President of the General Assembly, the UN General Assembly, to hold a special session of the United Nations General Assembly specifically on AGI. Why? Because AGI is coming and going to become a big deal and fast. And countries do not have a national licensing system for AGI, and the UN does not have any coordination on AGI. And we need to have both of them within just a few years. Or we should call for a pause on its development. Because just letting it go without any national and international regulation means the greatest concentration of power the world has ever known. And those that are controlling it will also eventually lose control as well. And how it evolves is anybody's guess. And then we go back to the idea of us treating the worm not so good. Now, so we need a UN General Assembly because we want politicians in all countries to talk to their own AI experts. Because if you have a UN General Assembly on AGI, then every country has to say what their position is. Well, the diplomats and the politicians don't know what their position is. So that would cause a teach-in around the world. The whole world would have to have, all these countries have to start talking to their own, what is it? What is it? What is it? Good. We as a species have to wake up on this. And I don't know of a more time, cost-effective way to teach the world what's going on other than a General Assembly, because it forces this conversation internal to countries about this stuff. And then they'll cross-reference each other, because Japan might say, well, what's the U.S. position? Or what's the South Korea position? And then China might say, what's your position? And so that's good. That causes the conversation that we have to have. Because right now, the human race is not on top of this issue. And if it doesn't get on top of the issue, then we could lose out. So that's one thing the listeners can do. Ask the foreign minister to ask the President of the General Assembly to hold a special session on AGI. That's one. The second is contact your local legislature representative. It's in the diet. It's a diet in Japan, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then contact your local diet representative and say, we would like you to start the legislation to authorize a national licensing system for both the development of AGI and the use of AGI. So those would be my two questions or suggestions to your audience.
Yeah, thank you for your very practical, pragmatical advice, and might be very good for the listeners to make any actions to bring this discussion is not remain in a country where then we will have an international context. So that was
Mhm.
remarkable to talk with Jerry this time, and very appreciated to sharing your experiences and ideas in this context and in this interview. Thank you for having.
ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。